Hello and welcome to the F1 Strategy Report, powered by Apex Race Manager, the mobile race management simulator. My name's Michael Lamonato, and this is round 21, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. If Lewis Hamilton's rivals thought they'd be able to take advantage of another of the Britain's post-title hangovers, they were sorely mistaken in Abu Dhabi, where the newly crowned world champion ended his 2018 season in dominant fashion, with victory from pole position. But there were mixed fortunes elsewhere in the final race of the season. The Red Bulls mixed their strategies to varying effects, and Valtteri Bottas endured another damaging Sunday to finish well off his teammates' pace. To wrap up the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and an engaging 2018 season, I'm joined by Ted Kravitz from Sky Sports F1. Ted, how are you doing?
Hi, Michael. Yeah, not bad. Starting the long winter. Well, someone called it hibernation today, a friend of mine. I don't quite go into hibernation, but yes, it's sort of natural rhythm of the year that you know that you're not going away again, and so your sort of mind tends to turn to all the other things that you've forgotten about doing for the year, like family and things like expenses and tax returns and stuff. So yeah, looking forward to a few weeks off.
All those secondary matters can finally come back to the forefront. The Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, I've always thought it was a great contradiction because it's such a beautiful setting for a race, and we do get that very timely sort of analogy that the sun sets on a Formula One season. Doesn't always produce the most exciting races, but in many respects this was the ideal 2018 race, given that Hamilton was just sort of in this just untouchable form, despite the fact that maybe his car wasn't perfect, didn't necessarily have all the tools to do it, but just managed to get one again over Sebastian Vettel. Yeah,
there was just enough to hold the interest, wasn't there? I mean, I don't know what would have made a difference. Maybe a couple of steps different on the tyres. That might have meant that, Daniel Ricciardo might have become a threat later on, or actually a sort of mid-race safety car giving Ricciardo a free pit stop. That would have juiced things up a bit, wouldn't it? Because it was looking like he might be, the only one to sort of get in contention, because Sebastian Vettel seemingly was sort of settling for second, didn't really have anything to answer Hamilton for. But as soon as Ricciardo sort of put those, red tyres on at the end, it was like, oh right, well that's that done. But there was interest throughout the field, though, wasn't there?
There was,
and let's not forget, there was. I mean, there's been the 2016, Hamilton going as slow as possible, try to stitch up Nico Rosberg. That was an exciting race at that circuit, wasn't it?
That was actually. It was sort of a weirdly opposite exciting race. How slow can you go is a different way for Formula One. There are a couple of things to consider at this point at the end of the season as well. I thought it was important that Hamilton could win this race, and he sort of alluded to it after the race as well, didn't he? Because this is the first season he's wrapped up a title early and hasn't seemed to have gone into like a mode of relaxation. He hasn't let himself absorb winning the title. He's really been full steam ahead in what I suppose is kind of like a precursor to his title defense next year. I mean, how much of a step forward do you feel like Hamilton has taken for this point in his championship winning seasons?
A big one. And didn't he let everybody know about it as well? Both on Thursday when I was talking to him and after the race, he was saying, hey, I am coming back next year stronger and tougher to beat than ever. And then he said it again after the race, didn't he? He said, this is all part of building for 2019, and I'm going to give Sebastian and Max just as hard a time. And I guess he's learnt, hasn't he? He's learnt from, when was it, 2015 into 16?
Yeah.
It was, wasn't it, when he really took his foot off the gas and let Rosberg in for that 2016 title year, which of course he then went on to win. So he's obviously learnt that was something that gave his rivals strength, him sort of going off on one. But what's interested me is that it might not have been that way. I mean, he wasn't going to win Brazil, was he? Verstappen was going to win that. And then you could argue he only won Abu Dhabi maybe because Mercedes opened up the holes on their rear wheel spacers. Because whenever they have them open, they win a race. And whenever they close them up, it seems they don't win a race.
And this is a genuinely interesting part to consider, because And when we'll look at this strategy, consider this in more detail, but such a long final stint on the super soft tyres.
Yeah.
Mercedes seemed extremely confident it was going to work.
Didn't they just?
But off the back of 3 races now where the story for Mercedes has been horrible tyre wear, this is a real turnaround. It's no wonder Hamilton seemed concerned in the middle of the race that he wasn't going to get to the end.
I know. What gave Mercedes that confidence that the whole of that race, I mean, would last on that set of tyres? And they were. I mean, before they were telling us, no problem on the red super soft. It's absolutely fine. I mean, what kind of destroys that argument, of course, that it's all about the holes in the rear wheel rims, is that nobody else really had problems making that tyre last, did they? I mean, Bottas had to 2-stop, but that's because they saw some damage on the right rear, I think it was, after the little clonk with Verstappen. So, yeah, maybe it was just a sort of a factor of that circuit. As it cools off towards the evening, it's not particularly abrasive on tyres, and that meant that they could go in. But yes, well, it's certainly... there's evidence to support both sides, isn't there?
Yeah, it's the right time for a conspiracy theory anyway. No one can be asked any questions. We've got 3 months to just sort of mull over it, and maybe we can follow it up in Melbourne. Who knows?
Yeah, well, Ferrari weren't, they were adamant, we're not going to protest the holes if they do run them open, so they could have done. They could have protested it with nothing really to lose. They might as well. But maybe they thought, oh well, we're gonna lose it because the FIA have already investigated it at the behest of Mercedes themselves, and found them legal. So maybe they just thought it would have smacked of, I don't know, bad losers. Maybe
It wouldn't be the first time though. But yes, possibly better for everybody that they let it alone. Before we look into this race in more detail, though, we contrasted Hamilton winning this last couple of races, even if some of them were somewhat fortuitous compared to previous seasons. This was also a race billed as Bottas's last chance to end his season on some kind of positive note. He started well. It's had a mostly difficult year otherwise, though. And he sort of said this himself after the race, that this was pretty much a summary of his season. This race, too, started okay, and it ended with him making a second stop, finishing more than 40 seconds behind Hamilton. How big a blow, not only has this race been, but the latter part of this season been to what is a very good driver, and one that Mercedes did genuinely feel like could be a really great compliment to Hamilton.
It's been sad to observe, really. We've seen flashes of, the old Bottas confidence, and the races that he has won, and the weekends where he's come and dominated. I'm thinking of a Russia or an Austria. There was an Austria last year, wasn't there, that he won, I think. It's been, you've seen it in his eyes from the beginning of the weekend, and I saw a glimmer of that at the beginning of this weekend. He came in, he was quite confident in the way he was talking about wrapping up the year, and from practice it looked quite good. He headed one of the practice sessions, but after FP2, Hamilton found a setup that he was really happy with, and from then on, it was just always going one way. FP3 was kind of inclusive, and then in qualifying, Hamilton pulled out something else to absolutely everybody. There was that warning lap, wasn't there, in qualifying 2, I think it was, where suddenly he turned up the engine, and it was like, whoa, beat that. And then in Q3, all he had to do was keep his nose clean, and he managed to do it, not by much, only by 0.2 on Bottas, but that was enough. And maybe had Bottas been on pole with Hamilton alongside and then sort of Ferrari behind him, then he would have gone on to win the race. But that's counting without the well-motivated Hamilton that we've already spoken about.
Do you see Bottas being able to bounce back next year, and what could really be his final chance at Mercedes, given that they now have an abundance of drivers in need of seats?
Well, you've touched on perhaps the reason why no, he won't be able to, because he sees the looming stature of Esteban Ocon over his shoulder, saying, this seat's mine for 2020, my friend. You could argue that it's well motivating for Bottas to go out and show Toto Wolff that, he will not be parted with his seat. And that's up to him. I hope he does, because I think he deserves to stay there, and I think he's perfect for Hamilton. But would Ocon give Hamilton a harder time? I don't know, maybe. It depends how you think Ocon is compared to Bottas. I would have thought they're probably about the same. or whether you think Ocon is a Hamilton beater. Well, I don't know. Do we have the evidence to support that yet? So I hope not, to answer your question. I hope Bottas can go out there and give a good account of himself and win 2, 3 or more races. But it's going to be tougher next year. And don't forget, you've got Leclerc in a Ferrari as well. So he's going to be winning some races as well.
Let's turn our attention more to the setup for this Grand Prix. There was some news about the tyres in particular. And tyres, of course, play a critical part in all of our races these days. No less here in Abu Dhabi. But there was, of course, some tyre confirmations ahead of this weekend. This is the last time we'll see the combination of super soft, ultra soft and hyper soft. It's only a year ago we were talking about the hyper softs coming into Formula One because they won't be called those things next year anymore. They'll just be called hard, medium and soft, and we've been confirmed that they'll be identified by their numbers if we wanted to know more about the compounds. But not for the first time this year. If we talk about the hypersofts, we've had this situation where no one actually wants to use them at all. Everyone tries to use the ultrasoft in Q2 to set up as their race start tyre, and there's been this concern always for the midfield drivers who qualify in the top 10 that starting on the hypersoft ends up being this horrible disadvantage to the drivers behind them, given it's so close in that part of the field. The tyre situation this year feels like it's taken a little bit of a step backwards compared to previous years. Is that the sense the drivers have been given you, that they're no longer able to really maximise this rubber? And is that something you think can change for next season?
I don't know if it can change for next season. The drivers aren't happy with the Pirelli tyres. They've made various veiled comments about that. Sometimes, you hear them say that the tyres won't let them do that. They held a meeting, didn't they, with the FIA, to a GPDA meeting, to effectively whinge a bit about the tyres. The FIA said, well, we're not interested. And, I feel sorry for Pirelli because they had the teams in their ear saying, come on, bring softer tyres to the racetrack. And then look what happens. Exactly what you said was that, oh no, too soft, wearing out. Don't like them, we're not going to use them. It's like, well, hang on. You asked for this. You asked for when the tyres were too hard, you asked for them to be a step softer. So Pirelli can't win, really. But I'm still trying to get my head around what they're going to be. So I'm so glued to the fact that yellow is soft that I have to get used to that being the medium now.
Yeah.
And that the white is not the medium anymore. The white is hard. Correct me if I'm wrong here.
I think that's right.
And then the red is staying as
soft.
The red is soft.
Yeah, you're right. Yes, this is a change. I had only just realised this.
I did have a ceremonial throwing away of my pencils, of my strategy pencils. So I threw away the pink one and the purple ones.
Oh no!
So I've kept the white ones and the red ones and the yellow ones. It is that. I'm not going mad, isn't it?
No, a white pencil's rare, though. I'm not sure where you found that or how useful it is.
Well, the lead is black.
Oh,
it's
of
just
course.
The,
that would make much sense.
It's just the outside. That's fine. But anyway, yeah, I feel sorry for Pirelli. But hey, listen, they've got their deal extended to the end of 2023. I'm not quite sure how serious the Hankook offer was, but I think it was serious from their point of view. But sadly, I don't know how much it was really investigated, whether they got further than some sort of technical tender.
They were very quiet about most of the bid, to be honest. I mean, obviously Pirelli had the benefit of being there, being able to talk to people, but yeah, you feel like there wasn't a lot to be heard from Hankook, but it's hard to know exactly what's happened behind the scenes. There was one front runner who started on the hypersoft tyre, and it was Max Verstappen, and that was sort of the contra strategy. It was thought to be the slower strategy, but Red Bull was in this difficult situation where, despite having the tyre where you'd have to push hard early, he qualified behind Daniel Ricciardo, who qualified on the ultra soft tyre, which of course would be able to run longer. In the end, that was kind of a bit of an academic problem because Verstappen lost places off the line. But interesting that even by the end of the race, Verstappen managed to find his way ahead of Daniel Ricciardo because the Australians seemed to have maybe not the optimum strategy in hindsight. There was championship positions at stake here, admittedly, for Verstappen, but what was your take on the way that Red Bull essentially allowed Verstappen to undercut Ricciardo early in the race?
I don't suppose we should be surprised, really. I mean, but that was everything was a bit academic. Hamilton was meant to go long on the purples, wasn't he? But on the ultra soft. But then the virtual safety car was too good an opportunity for Mercedes to resist. So, and Verstappen didn't pit. The one you would have expected to pit under the virtual safety car to get those pink hypersofts off. He didn't pit then. He actually waited until later on. So, I don't know. You could argue, if you're that way inclined, that it was a stitch up from Red Bull, that they were never going to let Daniel challenge Max towards the end. I kind of thought that the only way to do something different was to run Ricciardo a bit longer and then put the hypersofts on and see if he could keep them alive, stop them from graining on lighter fuel, and do some attacking from there. But they didn't do that, and so all you were doing was giving him a younger super soft tyre offset to Verstappen ahead. And while he closed, he didn't really close enough, and even if he had closed, the nature of the Abu Dhabi track means that he probably wouldn't have been able to get past. So the evidence does point to them not giving the greatest strategy to the guy who's on his way out to Renault, doesn't it? But that's the way it turned out. I don't know. He wasn't too... Well, if he was annoyed about it, Danny Rick at the end of the race, he wasn't really giving much away. He hinted at it, I think, in his post-race interviews, but I think he knows the form by now, which obviously is one of the kind of reasons that he's going to Renault, isn't it? That he can see the motion and the direction of travel from the Red Bull team, and it's not towards him, it's towards Verstappen.
Is it time that relationship had to end, do you think? Because it's been nowhere near as explosive as previous, let's say, Red Bull racing relationships where there's been a hint of favouritism. There's been not really any sniping or any such thing, and Ricciardo and Verstappen seem to get along fine. But like you say, there's this thing bubbling under the surface that's sort of talked around a lot but never really addressed.
I think it had to change for Daniel Ricciardo's mindset and his maturity and his joy of going racing. I think he could see what was happening. He could have hung on, that's fine. It would have been decent money. He could deal with Verstappen. Maybe the team, favour him. Maybe they don't. Maybe Verstappen beats him more in qualifying, which has been the case. But Ricciardo's shown his quality, and he shows that on the right day, he's the one who can overtake loads of people and win races. I think two crucial factors. Firstly, that one of needing to move away, fly the coop, grow up a bit, tried life with a different team, number one. Number two, the Verstappen factor. And number three, the Honda factor. He could see the Honda engine coming in and thinking, well, all right, I've already had bad luck with Renault engines. I don't really fancy coming in and having bad luck with Honda engines as well. Thank you very much. And I've seen that, they're no closer to being any more reliable than they have been over the last 2 or 3 seasons this year with Toro Rosso. So I think that probably nailed it for him. And while Verstappen it's a long-term prospect with Honda, isn't it? Mm-hmm. He's accepting the fact that he might retire a few times with blown engines next year, but he says, well, that's no different from what he's got now. Mm-hmm. So he might as well he'll take the extra power, which will help him challenge Ferrari and Mercedes on equal terms of pace, if then he has to take an engine penalty, every third race because the engine's blowing up. Verstappen will take that. I just thought Ricciardo thought, well, that's another reason maybe not to stay.
And Verstappen would have had literally a full face of that in this race after being covered in oil from Pierre Gasly's broken Honda engine. So a real taster, almost literally, of what's to come from next season. The Red Bull Racing battle was still a little way behind the pace of Hamilton and Vettel, which has more or less been the case. They've had their opportunities to snipe at victories this season, but haven't been consistently on the pace. Vettel didn't really get a chance to battle with Hamilton in this race. He was originally preoccupied with Valtteri Bottas, who was well off the pace by the end of the race, but for the first half was defending admirably. In fact, he spent most of this season defending, so he's gotten quite good at it, I suppose, hasn't he? But Ferrari attempted the undercut in the first stint. Lap 15 was when they brought Vettel in, but it was a slow stop, and it really goes to highlight how fine the margins have been between Mercedes and Ferrari, given that I think Vettel's stop was only around a second slower than Bottas, but that was enough to drop him into traffic and enough to completely undo this strategy, and perhaps is what is a bit of a summation of Ferrari season so far.
Let's not forget, this is the Ferrari team that suffered the pit stop disaster for them in Bahrain. The poor Francesco Cigarini and breaking his leg, and that they're still feeling the effects of that. So yes, Ferrari's pit stops post Bahrain haven't been the quickest, and that has affected them in the race. And you're right, it is that close, which kind of answers why the teams go to all this great expense to come up with these crazy pit stop traffic light systems, you know, and hugely expensive and highly torqued wheel guns and wheel nuts that are made of 25 different pieces in order to gain this time, because it does decide races. That's probably not a great advert for, you know, the health of the racing in the sport if it's all going to be decided by, you know, the twitch of a mechanic's thumb. But I guess it adds a sort of interesting sidebar. But yeah. I mean, I think it was kind of speculative from Ferrari. It was a nice try. Bottas was always going to have him covered. He had that 2-second margin, and the slow pit stop just meant that it was even more comfortable for Mercedes. But hey, Vettel got that place back in the end, didn't he? He got the P2.
Mm-hmm. And it seemed like, I mean, if you look at the times towards the end, he finished only 2.8 seconds behind Hamilton.
A coasting Hamilton.
Yeah, exactly right. It almost looked close, but realistically, there was just this, it was classic Hamilton, wasn't it? Where just enough pace in hand, never going to let him get too close. The way this season ended, it really sums it up. And it's sort of the same case as last season, wasn't it? Where Mercedes struggles a little bit at the start, but by the end of the year, they know their car so well. The drivers are very comfortable. Hamilton's very comfortable in that car. It's so difficult to trip them up in any way, and 2.8 seconds is probably as close as Vettel would ever be able to get.
No, you're right. And I wonder whether in the back of Hamilton's mind was that this is the very same engine that the engineers said was on its last legs and wouldn't see out a lap in Brazil. This is the very same engine that, due to a problem in the air system, was cooking itself for more or less the whole of the Brazilian Grand Prix, and they somehow managed to not only look after it during the race, but then assess whether it was going to be all right in the factory afterwards, and then it managed to do the whole of the weekend, including the practice sessions, with a clean bill of health. So that surely would have been in the back of Hamilton's mind, that he just had to nurse it home, because that would have been annoying, wouldn't it, to have dominated the weekend. Dominate all of that, or even though the championships are sewn up, to go out in a cloud of an engine blow up and let Sebastian Vettel in to win, that would have annoyed Lewis and Toto and everyone at Mercedes, considering that Bottas had problems and so wouldn't have inherited the win.
And that patience did actually define Hamilton's race in Abu Dhabi, because we've talked about the early stop, lap 7 behind the virtual safety car for Kimi Raikkonen's failed Ferrari on the front straight. There was no real aggression after that from Hamilton. It was completely a controlled, well-executed race, because he came out just behind Max Verstappen, who hadn't pitted at that point, and of course Daniel Ricciardo ahead of him as well. Did initially attempt to attack, but decided actually the better route for the long-term view of the race was to sit back by about 3 or 4 seconds and just let the race come back to him, which I suppose is another sign that he's got this greater overall view of a race these days, Hamilton, whereas once upon a time he was very much in the moment of every Grand Prix. He's become a lot more adept at looking at the longer-term game over a 55-lap race.
The way he describes it, you know, you're right. The way he describes it is spending your £100 or 100% of the tyre. And if you spend too much of the tyre too quickly, if you go straight out, buy a 50 quid chunk of grip and then buy another 20 quid chunk of grip or dollar or whatever, then you're going to leave yourself, you know, with not much money to pay for the next few laps worth of food, if you see what I mean. So and we saw that from Sebastian Vettel, didn't we, when he set the fastest laps towards the end of the race, and you think, well, hang on, there's plenty of grip left in those tyres. Did you not want to spend some of that grip earlier on? Challenging Lewis. I mean, Vettel kind of was asked about it afterwards and said, well, you know, whenever I did, he always had an answer for me. But yeah, anyway, I thought that was interesting, that maybe Vettel doesn't have that same kind of feel for how much grip you can get to and spending it nicely, so that when you get to the end of the race, you know, the piggy bank is empty, if you like. There's no more grip. You've spent the grip very nicely over that stint, and you've got the best out of it whenever you wanted. But And had Vettel, had that not been the case, maybe Vettel wouldn't have been able to set these fastest laps towards the end. Of course, probably too much to his annoyance, it wasn't actually him who got the fastest lap at the end. It was Bottas on a new set of tyres, and that got Bottas the most fastest laps for the season award, didn't it? So at least Bottas didn't go home completely empty-handed.
Yeah, he won that famous Formula One trophy for fastest laps. Yes. I'm sure a great consolation for him.
Are you going to name check it?
Yeah, I couldn't even remember. Which is this the DHL sponsored one? I can't remember which one.
It's one of the 2 DHL sponsored trophies that drivers get given on a Sunday morning, or in the case of the fastest pit stop and the fastest lap. I think they get it after the race. So they get the 2 DHL trophies, and it was after the they don't do the pole position trophy, do they, anymore?
I thought Lewis Hamilton won that. The tyre trophy, isn't it? Didn't he sort of remark afterwards that he had no idea what he was going to do with a giant tyre as a trophy?
Okay. You get a giant tyre for the most poles, do you? I always thought the pole trophy was going to be a big scaffolder's pole. So one sort of big metal pole. But no, I think the pit stop trophy looked like... it looked like a wheel rim.
That was the top 5 of the race. Hamilton from Vettel, the Red Bulls, and then Valtteri Bottas. We want to talk long stints, though, because the midfield's often been the home of more unusual strategies, given it's so close. And we had this, as we sort of foreshadowed earlier, this tension between the cars that started outside the top 10 and had free tyre choice in the first stint, and those who had to start on the hypersoft tyre. Carlos Sainz was the winner of Class B, if you like, and I almost feel like we do need a genuine Class B championship. So far behind is the midfield this season. He ran 37 laps on the ultra-soft tyre to jump not only Charles Leclerc, but also Sergio Perez, who was actually ahead of him for the start of the race. Perez, though, jumped too early for his pit stop and was responding more to Charles Leclerc. And in the end, he didn't get ahead of Charles Leclerc. So there are 2 aspects to this, I suppose. The first is that Leclerc stopped behind the virtual safety car on lap 7 and then got stuck behind Fernando Alonso in what's been almost a bit of a long-running battle this season. We've seen Leclerc and Alonso, old generation and new, fighting. Still a strong result for him behind Sainz, though, in 7th place.
Yeah, it was good stuff, wasn't it? I mean, it was all... It looked tempting, and I can understand why the people who did stopped under the virtual safety car. But then, as you say, with Leclerc, that either left him out behind Alonso, or with the likes of Grosjean and Ocon, left them behind Stoffel Van Dorn, which completely wrecked their race. It was Grosjean who did stop under the virtual safety car, didn't he? Ocon didn't. But then got stuck behind them later, and that's what Ocon. That's where it all started to get messy, didn't it, for Esteban Ocon? And he picked up a 5-second penalty for clonking wheels. It was, you can get into these positions, but I mean, very, very good race by Carlos Sainz. Very well needed points just to secure Renault their Class B, as you say, or Formula 1.5, or champions of the rest, whatever you're going to call it. And pride was at stake as well, because it made sure that Renault were P4 genuinely, considering the 2 Force India tallies. And they were quite clear they wanted to point that out. They said that even had Force India not had the break in the middle of the season, if you added up their old tally and their new tally, that still wouldn't have beaten Renault for P4. And by the same margin, didn't Force India do amazingly to start again from scratch and still finish P7 in the constructors, beating Sauber? And I think Sauber will be annoyed about that, really, because they had a decent car from sort of Barcelona onwards when they understood it. And Charles Leclerc was a complete superstar from them. Maybe if Marcus Ericsson had been able to contribute a few more points, they would have gone ahead of the new Force India. But to be outscored by a team who only had 8 races in which to outscore them must have been particularly annoying for Sauber, I think. And
it was a net 5th, I think, for Force India on aggregate, just behind Renault, but ahead of Haas, I think I'm right in saying, if my maths serves.
Yes, I think you're right.
Considering the Sauber situation, though, if we want to talk about Leclerc, and I guess is an answer we might get next year, but how much do you feel like Sauber's impressive performance, particularly latterly in this season, has been just down to him outperforming the machinery, which I guess inversely suggests that maybe the opposite is Ericsson underperformed this year, despite having a pretty promising start?
I think, to be fair, Sauber have used Ericsson a fair bit in some races, as protection for Leclerc. But yes, he has underperformed compared to the young Monegasque. There's no question about that, and that's probably why he wasn't kept on. But no, you're right. I mean, Leclerc is quality. He made a couple of mistakes early on, didn't he? We've forgotten all about them. But since Azerbaijan, since Baku, which is somewhat of a sort of lucky race for him, has been in F2 and was this year as well in F1. Leclerc has looked, supreme, completely on top of his machinery. He knows what's important. He knows what's important to get the job done and score the points, which is really all, Sauber want from him. And so, hats off. He's done the business, and he'll help Ferrari try and win the constructors next year. But whether, I'm just interested in this, how it's going to work with them. Are they going to really let him challenge Sebastian for the Drivers' Championship, a guy who's never even finished on the podium yet, let alone won a race? Are they going to let him challenge for wins in the Championship? Really? I hope they do. But it's kind of an open question at the moment.
Well, will they have a choice? If he comes out and starts competing from the get-go, it won't really necessarily be in the hands of team management, will it? I mean, you can't help but think of 2014 when Daniel Ricciardo arrived at Red Bull Racing and had the better measure of Vettel.
True, and it depends how quick a learner Charles Leclerc is, because he's got 4 days, hasn't he? There's 8 days in total of testing. So he's got 4 days plus the day he's got on Wednesday of this week in Abu Dhabi. So he's got 4 days to learn what Sebastian Vettel has learnt about pressing the right buttons at Ferrari. I don't mean literally, although that probably helps. To beat Vettel, who's been there for 4 years now. So let's see if he is a quick learner or not.
It will be one of the great stories. So Leclerc finished 7th. The trick for Sainz to stay ahead was to wait until Leclerc got stuck behind Gasly and then build enough of a gap, something that Perez fell into the trap of. He finished behind Leclerc in 8th place. And then we had Grosjean and Magnussen in 9th. Grosjean also stopped behind the virtual safety car, finished just ahead of his teammate Kevin Magnussen, despite Magnussen having a poorer start, but he ran a longer first stint on the super soft tyre. I was actually surprised to look back on this year, given that Grosjean in the latter part of this season has pulled himself together, has had a lot of good races, but the points gap to Magnussen has been quite significant. And you could almost argue that the reason Haas didn't finish ahead of aggregate Force India, if we want to call them that, or maybe even Renault, was that Grosjean hasn't scored nearly as many points as probably should have been expected of him. He's a difficult driver to sum up, I suppose, Grosjean, isn't he? He's a confidence driver, but it's difficult to know exactly how he can build his confidence at different times in the year. Is next year, if we have another lukewarm season, do you think that will be it for Grosjean, given Haas clearly has its sights set quite high these days?
I don't know, because we thought after the major career-threatening wobble that Grosjean had towards the beginning and the middle of this year, that this year would be it. But then, the natural innate speed he has saved him his job, essentially, and the fact that Gene Haas likes him, and Gene Haas is a man of principle and wants to support him, because Grosjean supported him and Gunther Steiner when they were putting together the team, and Grosjean had faith, so Gene has repaid that trust and that faith. So, but who out there really is, in line for that seat, considering that Ferrari kind of have a bit of influence there, maybe not too much. I don't know. You kind of can see those two guys carrying on still next year, can't you? Because, Grosjean was fantastic in qualifying in Abu Dhabi. When everything was absolutely right, that innate speed that he's got, the lovely feel for the car, just got him, well up into the top 10. And all right, that didn't help in the long run, because as you say, once you're in the top 10, you're committed to the tyres you've got, and that doesn't help. Help Sainz and Perez beat Grosjean on a Sunday, as you've already outlined. But Grosjean's a funny one. I mean, you half expect him to be immediately heading out of the door and retiring to Formula E or to family life, as well as being a strong candidate for some better cars out there. But I guess it's looking at who else is out there who might fancy a shot at it. I mean, Stoffel Van Dorn, you would probably say next year, is the guy who's going to be the most talented driver out there who won't have a Formula One seat. I mean, Brendan Hartley, we know now, won't be around. I think you'd probably say Stoffel's record makes him a bit of a better bet, but both men down on confidence, but we know they're solid drivers. Who else will be out there? Sergei Sirotkin, would he be knocking on the door of a Haas drive if Grosjean, isn't up for it? Maybe. Difficult to know really who would be out there to take his place. So I'd say he's probably safe for another year.
We've also got Antonio Giovinazzi at Sauber, which is again, depends how strong that Ferrari connection is, I suppose, but that could be a sign of natural progression if he does well. That'll be another interesting driver to keep an eye on for next year, but only up, presumably, for Haas from here, which is always good news when a midfield team can progress forward. And to wrap this race up, though, it's hard not to mention Fernando Alonso. It was just another McLaren race, really, at the end of the day. He finished 11th, just outside the points, ran to lap 27 on the ultra softs and then ended on the super softs. Didn't seem that fussed to score a point as well. In fact, there was a radio exchange where his engineer really wanted him to score a point, but Alonso remarked that he already had 1,800 of them in his career and didn't need another one. Even though I think he's actually got closer to 1,900, so he even underestimates himself this late in his career, doesn't he? The final race for Alonso, or is it? I guess that's the question. Is the last race Fernando Alonso has in Formula One sort of so-so 11th place in Abu Dhabi?
Well, here comes the biggest conditional phrase you ever heard. If you believe Flavio Briatore,
oh my goodness,
how's that for a conditional question? Then it's not Fernando Alonso's last Formula One race, and that he will definitely be back. Because Flavio, if you could cut through the accent, was pretty clear about that. Was pretty clear that he'll take a year off, let things move around on the driver market, and then come back. Well, all right, Flav, but come back where? What? Vettel retiring? Lewis retiring? Because they're the only seats that Fernando would come back to. He's not going to come back to Red Bull Honda, no matter how good they are.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Largely because Honda probably won't have him back. But, Mercedes have often said, haven't they, that if Lewis were to suddenly decide that, after 6 world titles, something like that, he's had enough and is going into, I don't know, continue his fashion designing full time, then they would look at Alonso. And they'd have to, wouldn't they? But that's a pretty big if. So, I don't know, Flav. I don't know where he would come back to. It would take something big to happen to open up a place for the right conditions where Mercedes would consider having him back. And Ferrari, would they consider having him back? All right, it's a different management for the people who he annoyed when he said that Ferrari are never going to win a world championship when he left at the end of, when was it, 2014? No, earlier before that. But they've got long memories at Maranello, so they might not fancy him back. And if they think, Leclerc is the man, sort of natural successor to Sebastian Vettel, maybe they wouldn't need him in the team.
Is it a Alain Prost scenario where he comes back for 1 year at a top team, wins a championship, and then goes away again, goes and does whatever he wants to do, IndyCar or however he approaches it?
Could do, although the Prost thing was 93?
Yeah, it would have been 93, I think.
So that was in the hype of the Renault Williams domination, and Mansell was kind of convinced, wasn't he, that Renault wanted Prost because they wanted a Frenchman to win the title with their engine. That soured relations with Frank Williams and led to Mansell sort of, going off to IndyCar in an angry frame of mind, didn't it? So slightly different. I know what you're saying. I know what you're getting at, but I think there was sort of more of a, Renault Prost arrangement in there that that's the way that one was going to shake out, in a sense that I don't get a sense that anyone has kind of predetermined now to have Alonso back in 2020, but might be wrong.
Yeah, well, we'll see. It adds an extra level of intrigue for the next 2 seasons. So already setting up 2020.
Yeah, but we kind of all said our goodbyes. Tearful goodbyes to Fernando. Now you kind of don't want him to come back because you've invested all that emotional energy in saying goodbye to him. It's like, oh, all right. Well, did we all do that? It's like the Massa. We all cheered him down the pit lane, crying our eyes out in Brazil, and then what do you know? He comes back the next year.
It's just awkward. It's like saying goodbye to someone, then walking the same way out of the restaurant. It's uncomfortable for everyone. I hope he considers that in his future plans anyway. The Abu Dhabi Grand Prix was the wrap-up of, what was it? Genuinely, I think, a fairly good season, even if the result ended up being fairly one-directional. It does set up some interesting stories, I think, for 2019, which hopefully can only be better. And Ted, it's been a pleasure to look back on Abu Dhabi and the 2018 season with you.
Enjoyed it. Thanks, Michael.
That was Ted Kravitz from Sky Sports F1. The Strategy Report is a Beer Mogul podcast powered by Apex Race Manager, the mobile race management simulator. You can get every episode by subscribing on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your favourite podcasting app. And you can leave a review to help other F1 fans find the show. You can also read the written report at f1strategyreport.com and stay up to date by finding us on Facebook and on Twitter. And that is another year of Formula One racing done and dusted. Thanks very much to Nathan Harper and Beer Mogul who make this podcast possible, and to all of the guests who've joined me throughout the year. And finally, of course, a big thanks to you for downloading this podcast. It's been a real pleasure to have your company for all of the season's twists and turns, and I hope you've enjoyed listening to the show as much as I've enjoyed making it. My name's Michael Lamonato. Look me up at Michael Lamonato on Twitter, and I'll catch you after the off-season when we'll do it all again for 2019.